learn more about one of our local waterways that is managed by CERM, which is the Center for Environmental Resource Management. I'm Liz Walsh. I'm the acting director of CERM, and the presentation today is by our former park manager, John Sproul, who was there at the inception of the park until now he's our best volunteer, and by current park manager, Sergio Samaniego, who is a former UTEP student who got his master's degree in Hawaii. So everybody, welcome, and let's learn more about desert wetlands, restoring river valley ecosystems at the Rio Bosque Wetland Park. Thank you guys for coming today.
Thank you, Liz. How do we operate everything here?
Oh, we should have went over that at the beginning, I guess. Let me get the baby back. I'll do the end this one. Okay.
Okay, yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Back
John.
a little over 50 years ago, back in December of 1973, the city of El Paso acquired a large parcel of undeveloped open space through a program called the Federal Lands to Parks Program. And,
Is the mic on? Or you need to hold it closer?
intended for this facility to become a large regional park. It was right there. It was named Rio Bosque Park. Initially, the original acquisition was 276 acres, and today it's been expanded to 372 acres. But one of the very first recommendations that came out in discussions about how this area might be used was the idea that maybe create some wetland habitat at Rio Bosque Park. And in the early 1980s, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service began promoting the idea of developing some wetland habitat at Rio Bosque in conjunction with other water resource projects that were being considered in our region. And it took almost 20 years for this idea to move from concept to reality, but ultimately it did happen. And this is the project that made it happen. This is the American Canal Extension. It's a concrete line canal that parallels the river from downtown El Paso down to the Rio Bosque area. In fact, if you look in the distance there, you can see the Jonathan Rogers water treatment plant in the background. This is a project that was built primarily with federal funds. The U.S. section of the International Boundary and Water Commission was the lead agency for the project. And as a federally funded water project, it had to include a mitigation component, a companion project that would help offset the negative environmental impacts of building and operating the concrete line canal. So as part of the planning proceeded for the canal project, the Fish and Wildlife Service was approached to develop a recommendation for a mitigation project. Fish and Wildlife Service suggested that creating about 30 acres of freshwater emergent wetland habitat would be appropriate mitigation. Rio Bosque was the best place to do it. So as work started on the canal project, planning also began for a wetland project at Rio Bosque. And different groups got together, representatives of the city planning department, Parks and Recreation Department, Fish and Wildlife Service, the Boundary and Water Commission as the lead agency, and because water was obviously going to be a very important element in this project. A number of other water-related agencies were also participants in these discussions. The Bureau of Reclamation, so Water, Pasco County Water Improvement District #1, local irrigation district, and also the Office of the Texas Rio Grande Compact Commissioner. The Compact Commissioner's Office, the private wetland conservation organization Ducks Unlimited invited into the process, and Ducks Unlimited introduced a very interesting idea. That was that creating about 30 acres of wetland would be great, but this is a 372 acre park. Why don't we think big and make that mitigation wetland the foundation for a much larger project at Rio Bosque Park, involving the entire area? Everybody was receptive to this idea, including the Boundary and Water Commission was willing to take on this much larger project. So Ducks Unlimited secured a grant from the Meadows Foundation in Dallas, Texas, to prepare designs for a wetland project at Rio Bosque. In 1997, the U.S. section of the International Boundary and Water Commission began doing all the site work for carrying out this project. Water, of course, was critical, and the main source of water was to be the treated wastewater from the Roberto Bustamante wastewater treatment plant immediately north of the park. Water would be discharged from the plant in a pipeline to an irrigation drain on the west side of the park, the Riverside Intercepting Drain, owned by the irrigation district. Discharge into the drain, it could then flow down the drain for about 4/10 of a mile. And at that point, it would be diverted into the park, and it would be diverted into an old river bend that wound through the park for about 2 miles, that was cut off back when the river was channelized in the 1930s. This old river bend had been there high and dry for years. As part of the work done in 1998, the Boundary and Water Commission, in 1997, the Boundary and Water Commission rebuilt that old river channel, so the water could flow through the old river channel all the way through it and be discharged back into the Riverside Drain, or it could be diverted at this point here and be delivered to a couple of large basins, the wetland cells of the park. And this system was first put into use in 1998. It proved to be a pretty good system when water was readily available from the Bustamante plant in late fall and early winter. There were no other competing demands for that treated water at that time. It was readily available to the park. However, early on, it became apparent that there was a little complication with this system. That was that every year when the irrigation season would roll around, the Riverside Drain would be closed off. There'd be no way to deliver water to Rio Bosque Park. And it would be closed off. This is every year it'd be a little bit different, but this is a pretty typical pattern. There'd be plenty of water available in November, December, January, maybe a little into February, and bang, it would be shut down. The park would be completely dry for 8-9 months out of the year, including throughout the growing season, when wetland habitats and riparian habitats need that water the most. So this was the pattern for the first 3 years out at Rio Bosque Wetland Park. And then in 2001 and 2002, we were very fortunate, and we were able to use the Riverside Drain during the growing season, and we're able to deliver some water from the Bustamante plant to the park. And the results were pretty phenomenal. The wetland habitat began developing in the wetland cells. Riverside riparian habitat began developing along the old river channel. We got to see how quickly these systems can respond and develop if you just have the right set of conditions. If you just add water at the right time of year. If you're familiar with the park, this picture was taken from the footbridge that crosses the old river channel near where the visitor center is today. It's looking upstream. That's how things looked after 2 years of water in 2002. But unfortunately, those 2 years were anomalies. And we then had 12 years straight going back to the old pattern, with water only available consistently in late fall and early winter, and little or nothing available most of the year. And all that progress that we saw in 2001 and 2002 pretty quickly began to fade away. 2013, it was just a dim memory of what things could be like there. Another thing happened though in 2012, and in the years after that, we put in lots of effort trying to find different ways to get additional water to the park during the growing season. A few minor successes, but mostly dead ends and roadblocks and frustration. And then 2012, another major important development at Rio Bosque Wetlands Park. In that year, El Paso Water made a very worthwhile observation. That was that if the administration of the park were transferred from the city's Parks and Recreation Department to El Paso Water and the city's Public Service Board, that would open up some new opportunities for El Paso Water to deliver water to the park from the Bustamante plant as part of their water management operations. In November of 2012, both the El Paso City Council and the city's Public Service Board passed this joint resolution, passed it unanimously, that making that transfer. So Rio Bosque Park became part of El Paso Water's water system. And then the following year, in 2013, a lot of things started to happen. We had a well that had first been put into operation in 2009 near the park's inlet. That was one of the first efforts to get some additional water out there. It had a lot of mechanical problems, a lot of breakdowns, but in that year we got it up and running again pretty well. In April of that year, a couple of windmills were installed at the park. That same month, El Paso County Water Improvement District Number 1 installed a turnout on the Riverside Canal, on the east side of the park, which gave us the capability to receive irrigation water if we could get some water rights assigned to the park. And then in the fall, El Paso Water installed a second well down near the park's inlet. So as we went into 2014, we had both those wells operating, and miraculously, they were able to maintain a flow the entire 2-mile length of the old river channel. So we started seeing recovery again along the old river channel, a narrow band of wetland and riparian vegetation developing. Back one there. But this was just along the old river channel. The larger wetland cells, there's not enough water to flood them. However, the other big thing that happened in 2013 was El Paso's Public Service Board passed a resolution directing El Paso Water to design and build a pipeline that could deliver water directly to the park from the Bustamante plant without having to use the Riverside drain. This pipeline was built between October 2014 and March of 2015. It was first put into operation in May, the 1st of May, 2015. So this year, the 1st of May is going to be the 10th anniversary of the Rio Bosque pipeline. But here, for the first time in 13 years, we started getting water into the wetland cells during the growing season. Also had a consistent flow through the old river channel, and things really started to take off. Well, and for the last 10 years now, we've had consistent water during the growing season, and that has allowed the next real big step in the evolution of the park landscape to take place. Then in 2017, a couple of years later, El Paso Water and the irrigation district reached an agreement that reclassified over 300 acres of land at the park as irrigable land with water rights. So now we're also getting some irrigation water during the summer months. That can vary a lot from year to year, but another source that became available. In really just about a 4-year period, the availability of water at the park changed from just this one source from just one limited period during the year to multiple sources and at least some water available throughout the year. Good things started happening all along the old river channel and throughout the park. However, all of these different water sources have some limitations associated with them. And sometimes all those limitations come into play at once. And as a result, securing adequate water for the park continues to be one of our biggest challenges. And getting that water distributed within the park to really maximize benefits for wetland and riparian habitats also continues to be a huge challenge. These are problems we have to deal with every day out there. And so with that, I am going to turn the mic over to Sergio, and he'll tell you a little bit more about our water management at Rio Bosque today.
Thank you, John. So today, I'm going to give you guys an update on the current water situation at the park. Hopefully the next few slides will give you a better idea of how things are looking out at the park and how important water is at Rio Bosque. I'll also be going over how we deal with low water availability when it comes to establishing native vegetation out at the park. And then we'll end on a high note with a few pictures of some plants and animals that you might run into if you visit the park. So this is a timeline of how we got to our current situation at the park, our current water situation at the park. So as John mentioned earlier, last year was a really good year in terms of water. We had water for most part of the year, about 338 days of the year we had some water. But water deliveries ended on October 7th, which is typical. The irrigation district usually takes the water for late irrigation purposes. So during that time, we usually take the time to mow the wetland cells and prepare them for the largest allocation of water, which comes in late fall and early winter. So during that time, we relied on our groundwater pumps and our 2 windmills. Those produce, our groundwater pumps produce around 400 gallons per minute when they're working at their peak. And the windmills usually produce around 5 gallons per minute. So it was just enough to keep things a little bit moist until we got some more water. And then on November 3rd, a little under a month, we started receiving water again from the Roberto Bustamante wastewater treatment plant. And pretty quickly, we were able to reflood the old river channel. It didn't take more than maybe 3 weeks to reflood it. But cell 1 and cell 2 took a little bit longer to flood. We think it's because things have been so dry out in El Paso. I don't know if you guys have noticed those big, ugly dust storms we've been experiencing the past few weeks. But last year, at the park, we have a rain gauge that we check on a daily basis. We received less than 3 inches of rain. To be exact, it was 2.67 inches. So this graph here shows you on the y-axis the precipitation amount in inches, and then the time of year on the x-axis. 2024 is represented by black, and you can see that it's one of the lowest precipitation percentages of recent history. So we think that that played a big role in us being able to completely flood the cells. So it took us some time, but at the end of the 3-month period, we received water. We were able to flood cell 1 to 90%, and cell 2, we were able to flood 100%. But unfortunately, our water deliveries came to an end again earlier this year on February 2nd. And very quickly, we started seeing things dry up in the old river channel and in the wetland cells within a couple weeks. So the next images will show you what I'm talking about. So this is an image of cell 1. This was at the end of last year. Around this time of year, we were probably receiving around 6 million gallons per day from the Bustamante plant. So as you can see, there's a nice flooded wetland cell. But then shortly after we got cut off, things really quickly dried up. So without that source of the Bustamante plant, after 5 days, this is what cell 1 looked like. This is another example. This is the old river channel. This was also taken at our peak water availability at the end of last year. You can see that it's nice and flooded. And then that's about 2 weeks after we got our water cut off. We're able to keep a little more water in the channel because we rely on the groundwater pumps to feed some water in there. So it usually sticks around for a little bit longer. And then shortly after that, a few days later, all the water soaked in and things went completely dry. So currently, we're relying on our groundwater pumps to feed some water in the old river channel. So like I mentioned earlier, our upstream pump is producing around 400 gallons per minute. But most of that water is being held up by a beaver dam. So for those of you that may not know, we have a resident beaver at the park. It noticed that the water was kind of fading away, and it was losing its home security, and started building up a beaver dam on the upstream end where the groundwater pump is pumping. So most of the water is held upstream by that beaver dam. And then we also have another groundwater pump near the visitor center, but that one's underperforming. It should be producing around 400 gallons per minute, but currently it's only at 200 gallons per minute. As you may know, wetlands are great at feeding the water table. They're a great source of recharge. We take daily readings of a series of groundwater wells out at the park. This is one of the wells, RB1B. And today we'll just focus on the black and the blue trends. So last year, like we said earlier, was a really good water year. So it's represented by the black line, and you can see that there's a steady flow of water coming through the channel, and it keeps the water table nice and high. But this year, with our water being cut off, you can see the strong drop a little after February. That's represented by the pink. You can see how deep the trend starts to drop after we stop receiving water. So that's another thing that's really important. By not having that flow of water from the Bustamante plant, we also see a drop in the water table. But even without the water and all these challenges, we keep pushing towards the restoration goals at the park. Earlier this year, we established 15 cottonwoods and willows. We do this by planting the trees using a pole planting method, where essentially we just harvest limbs from mature trees that we have at the park, like the one that John is holding in that image. And then we either use a hand auger, like those students are using, until we hit groundwater, and then install the pole, backfill, and water for a couple of years. If we need a bigger diameter hole, we use a gas-powered auger, like the one that the volunteers are using in this picture. And this is how the hole looks when it's ready for a pole planting. You can see that the groundwater is seeping through. So at this point, we're able to stab the tree into the hole and then backfill and care for it for at least a couple of years. When conditions are favorable and we have water in the old river channel, it's pretty easy for us to take care of the trees. So we usually just use these 5-gallon buckets and dip them into the old river channel and feed the trees that way. But when things are a bit more dry, like in 2022, 2022 was a similar year to this one, where we got cut off and the irrigation season was delayed until June. Like we were told it was going to be delayed for this year. We had to rent a tank with a electric pump that we used to fill some mature trees that were looking really stressed. So we built some wells around the mature trees that were looking kind of stressed and fed them water that way. Sometimes we also have to rely on our trusty water bladder here that we usually fill up at the Bustamante plant, and then fill buckets using that bladder to water the trees. That's a picture of John hauling some water to some trees in a remote area. So even with all the ups and downs of water availability and all the challenges we face at the park, it's always really rewarding to see the amount of wildlife taking advantage of the restoration project. So if you didn't know, Rio Bosque is one of the top birding spots in El Paso. At the beginning of the project, there were 107 bird species identified at the park. And currently there's over 260 species that you may see throughout the year. Also at the beginning of the project, there was 20 water birds before the wetland project, and now we're over 79. And these are a few pictures of birds that we've seen throughout the years out at the park. There's also, if you visit the park, there's also these networks of burrowing owls. These were put in by Lois Phelan from Texas Parks and Wildlife. And she uses them to monitor their nesting. So if you're quiet enough and lucky enough, you might bump into one of these little cute guys. And that's a picture of one of them up close that we took when we were banding the fledglings a few years ago. This is one of our newest murals out at the park. It's a purple prickly pear. Yeah, and if you go out to the park, many people think that there's really no flowers or pretty things to look out in the desert. But you'd be surprised. So if you ever get a chance, these were all taken with my phone. So you don't need any fancy gear to take good pictures of plants and animals. We also have a bunch of reptiles. I'm holding a king snake there. That one was hiding under a big tumbleweed during one of our community work days. Checkered garter snake, Texas horned lizard, and a spiny softshell. And those were all found at the park. Don has some really cool trail cams installed at the beaver dams. And we regularly get these pictures of different animals taking advantage of the water and the hunting opportunities at the beaver dam. So on the top photos, you can see a family of coyotes and a single coyote, a raccoon looking at its reflection at the beaver dam, and then a family of raccoons. And of course, the elusive bobcat. I took the picture on the left just using my phone and my binoculars. It was just waiting on us patiently on a tree, and the other two shots were taken on a trail cam. And this was the very first beaver dam that we found out at the park. It's covering most of the old river channel. It was blocking all the water from the upstream end. This is one of the last ones that we recently were able to break down with the help of the dance group from UTEP and Wesleyan University. And the culprit of all these dams is here. We've only caught one on trail cam, so we can only say there's one. Until we catch more than one on the trail cam, we'll be able to say there's more than one. But there's plenty of dams, so it wouldn't surprise us if there's more than one. So hopefully after this presentation, you get a sense of why Rio Bosque and water availability at the park is so important. It's not only important for the community, but it's one of the last natural spaces for all these animals that we just saw to exist in. If you want to be part of the project, we rely heavily on the Friends of the Rio Bosque. It's a volunteer support group. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you to a short survey that'll collect your email, and we'll send you some updates of the park and when our monthly community workday is, which is every third Saturday of the month. So if you're interested in joining the Friends of the Rio Bosque, you can go ahead and scan that code. You'll see some people with their phones. And it'll also direct you to our Friends of the Rio Bosque Instagram page. And you can also follow that and get all the updates on the park. And last but not least, like Dr. Walsh was mentioning earlier, we have an event this weekend, starting at 9. Hopefully we see many of you out there. If you want clearer directions on how to get to the park, you can go ahead and scan that QR code and it'll give you detailed information on how to get to the park. That's all we have. Don and I will take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Now we have plenty of time for questions. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, we have quite a few. I'm going to start in the back, work our way forward.
Thank you. I was wondering, what's over there? Were the beavers, did the beavers show up naturally or were they released there?
So we think they made their way into the park through the irrigation system, and yeah, to our knowledge, they weren't really introduced. They saw an opportunity to live in a nice ecosystem like the Rio Bosque, and took their chance. And but yeah, to my knowledge, they just made their way in there through the irrigation canals. John, you have something to say?
There were several times in the early years of the project
Hold on, John, we have to use the microphone because there's people on Zoom.
where beavers would show up during that period when we had lots of water, and then the water would get cut off, everything would go dry, and the beavers would leave. And this happened 3 or 4 times, and then the border wall was built, and it became much more difficult for a beaver to navigate its way into the park. We went about 10 years without seeing a beaver. And then this one individual showed up in 2019 in January. And as far as we know, it has been around ever since. It started out as just a little guy, and now it's a brute of a beaver.
You got some help, natural help.
Yes.
Other questions? Jerry?
Any work from TxDOT on the status of their highway plans as it affects the Bosque?
Maybe for those that don't know about the highway plans, you could just use that map there, John or Sergio, and show what the present alternatives that are being proposed by TxDOT are for the border highway extension project.
Yeah, just in general terms, this is a major highway project that Texas Department of Transportation is investigating. That at least the alternatives that have been presented thus far all would involve going through Rio Bosque Park. One of them would go along the western edge of the park, out in the wetland cells. And that would.
Yes, in the wetland cells.
And the other 2 would be on the east side of the park, for the most part on the other side of the Riverside Canal from the park, but down near the Bosque Trailhead and Visitor Center, they would come across the canal and right through that area and right next to the Visitor Center, and then continue downstream from there. None of these are options that we think are very desirable. And TxDOT had some public community meetings last year in the spring, and then they were going to revise and update their plans and come back with seek more community input and present a potential option that they favor. But they've been very quiet of late, and they decided against that additional public input. And what we're being told now is that sometime later this year, they will present what they think is their, I can't recall the exact term, but technically preferred alternative.
Anyway, none of the alternatives were good for the park because, like John and Sergio said, they're going to cause a major disruption to wildlife there. Other questions or comments? If you want to get involved in helping protect the park, again, that QR code for the Friends of the Rio Bosque.
Sergio, is there any contact with the, our native friends at the Tigua? And, what their perspective is on the Bosque and its future?
I haven't personally had any contact with them.
The tribe's general uh, approach to the park is very similar to ours. They appreciate the approach that we're taking to focus on native ecosystems and promoting the biological health and stewardship of the area. And they also have concerns about the highway project as well. Another key ally with the highway project is El Paso Water. All of the lands on the other side of the park, across the south from the park, are lands that are administered by El Paso Water. And El Paso Water has designated that entire area as a site that's going to be protected and left undisturbed for a carbon sequestration project. They placed a conservation easement on all of that land, and they're hoping that all of that will make it less likely that a highway goes through the area.
Any other questions or comments for John or Sergio? All right, well, we hope you all can come out to the park on Saturday, and if you can't, you can always volunteer on another day. John goes out there and volunteers almost most days when he's not at Feather Lake, I guess, another restoration site in El Paso. So let's thank John and Sergio for all the work they're doing at the park to try to conserve some natural riparian habitat. And I think our next presentation will start at 3:00. Is that correct, Daniel?
Yeah.
And that will be on another wetland that we have in our area, the Keystone Wetland, Keystone Heritage Park. And that's also undergoing conservation efforts by another former UTEP student, Mike Gaglio, and friends. Okay, so stick around for the 3:00. If you want to get another sandwich, there's more over here, plenty of food. And we'll see you in a few minutes.